everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing really well. Today I'm going to be bringing you another one of my 5 book recommendations within a certain genre or theme videos, and today we're going to be talking about classics. As always, I've tried to include a bit of a mix in this video, so whether you already like reading classics quite often or you've never picked up a classic in your life, hopefully this video should be good for you. Whether you're wanting something romantic or a bit more dark, something plot driven or character driven, or something with social commentary, whatever you're looking for, hopefully there should be something in this video that sparks your interest. So the first novel I'm going to recommend today is Emma by Jane Austen. So I absolutely love Jane Austen. I truly think she's one of the best writers we have to date. And I absolutely love her most famous novel, Pride and Prejudice. I think it's really brilliant, and if you haven't read it before, then you definitely should get around to doing that at some point. But because everyone's already heard of Pride and Prejudice, and it is so famous, I thought today I'd recommend one of her other novels that I also think is brilliant, and that maybe you haven't heard quite as much about. The protagonist of this novel is Emma Woodhouse, who is an extremely rich and spoiled young woman who is also extremely charming. So Emma loves to matchmake lovers, and this gets her into all kinds of trouble. And the novel basically just follows her story from there. As with all Jane Austen novels, this novel includes a really wonderful romance to follow, which makes the story so lovely. And it's also incredibly written. So Jane Austen is just such a wonder with words, and you can really tell that all of her individual sentences were very well thought through and specifically chosen. This one in particular looks at flawed characters, which I really enjoy reading about and really appreciate when a novel creates really believable flawed characters. And Emma in this novel is definitely flawed, and she stands out to me as being one of Jane Austen's most memorable characters. This novel also includes social commentary, because Jane Austen always likes to write her novels in a kind of satirical style that really mocks the class structures and gender structures that were prominent in this time period. And that is always such a joy to read about and is done incredibly cleverly. And in this one in particular, I think Jane Austen is at her most comedic best. So whether you've read any Jane Austen before or not, you should definitely add Emma to your list. It's just such a brilliant story that has characters in it that will annoy you, but you will grow to love. And as always, Jane Austen just has so much to say. So I really highly recommend this one. Next, I'm going to recommend for you A Study in Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle. And this is the first novel that introduces Sherlock Holmes. I'm sure you've all heard of Sherlock Holmes. In this novel, we get to see Dr. Watson meet Sherlock Holmes for the first time as they move in together on Baker Street and try to solve their first crime. So this novel is actually told in 2 parts. The first part where Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes are trying to solve the crime, and in the second part we get this tragic story of love and revenge where we get to see how the crime came about. So this is a very short classic, and it's very plot driven because it's focusing on the crime that happens, and it's also very fast paced. So if you're wanting to get into classics but you're worried that they might be too dense or too slow paced for you, then this one is definitely a good choice. This novel also just has some really great central characters. So seeing the relationship between Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes is really entertaining. And of course Sherlock Holmes is just really intelligent, so reading about him is really fun. You get to see the inner workings of his mind as he's trying to solve the crimes that are happening in the book. And seeing the way that he picks up on the clues and thinks about them really logically is really clever and just really entertaining to read about. So this novel is just a lot of fun, and it's really gripping, and it's a really great introduction into the world of Sherlock Holmes. And so if you're interested in that at all, or you're wanting a really short and accessible classic, then I highly recommend this one. The next book that I'm going to recommend for you is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This novel is told from the point of view of our protagonist, Nick Carraway, as he reflects on his time living near the infamous J. Gatsby in the 1920s. So Gatsby is madly in love with a woman called Daisy Buchanan, who is married to a hulking and really imposing man named Tom. And throughout this novel, we just get to see the summer unfold and all of the incidents that happen along the way. This novel is another one that has a really great mix of characters and plot, and it is also very short, so I wouldn't be outfaced by this classic at all. What I remember most about my reading experience of this novel was just how colourful and layered it was. So Fitzgerald uses a lot of colour and imagery and symbolism to create so many different layers of meaning in his novel, and it makes it so multidimensional, and there's so much in it, and it just creates a really rich reading experience. This novel is romantic and glamorous and fast-paced and also quite emotional. I just think it's brilliant, so if you haven't read this one yet, then definitely give it a go. Next, I'm going to recommend for you Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens, and this novel tells the story of Oliver Twist, who is a young orphan boy who is brought up in a workhouse in the early to mid 1800s before he runs away to London and gets taken in by a gang of pickpocketers under their gangmaster Fagin. This novel is much darker in tone than the other novels I've already mentioned so far. It's a scathing social commentary on the poverty that was rampant in London at the time, and Dickens was actually writing to bring attention to these injustices. And you can really feel his anger come through in this novel, which is fascinating to read about. Dickens is usually much more of a winter read for me, because his writing style is so traditional and story-like that you just get swept up into it. And his novels are also quite chunky, so you want time to properly get stuck into them. As well as having really interesting themes, this novel has really well-developed and interesting characters, and especially the villainous characters in this novel were a particular highlight of mine. So the gangmaster Fagin and the thug Bill Sikes were just incredibly rich and a lot of fun to read about. So if you're wanting a really detailed and rich story that's a very well-known classic, then Oliver Twist is the book for you. And finally, today I'm going to recommend for you Howard's End by E.M. Forster. I only read this novel for the first time earlier this year, and I absolutely loved it. It became an instant favourite of mine, and I'm sure I'll reread it many, many times over the course of my lifetime. This novel is set in London in the year 1910 and follows most primarily the two Schlegel sisters, Margaret and Helen, as they make friends with two very different families. So the very rich Wilcoxes and the very intelligent but poor Leonard Bast. This novel is primarily a social commentary on the class system in the early 1900s in England. So it's very cleverly done. E.M. Forster actually uses the families in the novel to represent the different classes. So the Wilcoxes in the novel represent the capitalist and extremely rich middle class. The Schlegels represent the idealistic and more liberal middle class, and the Basts represent the downtrodden workers. And seeing the ways that these families operated and interacted with one another was incredibly fascinating. But as well as all this cleverness, this novel is also just a really wonderful story about friendship and acceptance and love. And the two main sisters in this novel are just a joy to read about. They're so interesting and just charming and utterly likeable. This novel is just so thought-provoking and a joy to read. I can't recommend it more highly, whether you've ever read a classic before or not. So those were 5 of my classic recommendations. I really hope you enjoyed this video and thought my recommendations were good. If you've read any of the novels that I mentioned today, then please be sure to let me know what you thought about them down below. I'd love to know. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you all down below about classics. Please let me know what your favourite classic is actually as well down below. That sounds really interesting to me. So yes, that's all, and hopefully I'll see you all next week with my next video. Bye.